Tony Bellew versus Ilunga Makabu, the vacant WBC Cruiserweight World title. These are my final thoughts. This is a two-part video. This is part one, obviously. I'm going to do part two after the weigh-in, which will be on Saturday. Now, first of all, I want to address a couple of comments that were left on the last video I made about this fight. A couple of people said some interesting things. The first individual left a comment saying that Ilunga Makabu hits harder than Adonis Stevenson. And Adonis Stevenson knocked Tony Bellew out. Therefore, Makabu's going to knock Tony Bellew out. Well, everything in boxing don't hinge on punching power. Let me give you an example. Lennox Lewis got knocked out by Oliver McCall and Hasim Rahman. But yet he beat guys like David Tua, Razor Ruddock, Shannon Briggs, Vitaly Klitschko, etc., etc. Guys who hit harder than Oliver McCall and Hasim Rahman. And he beat them. So you can't base a whole fight around punching power. Boxing is a lot more nuanced than that. And you look at Adonis Stevenson and compare him to Ilunga Makabu. Does Makabu fight like Stevenson? Not even close. Makabu is a far more rudimentary fighter than Adonis Stevenson. Stevenson is far more side-on. Yes, they're both southpaws, but Stevenson's more side-on. And he boxes far more at long range. I don't know if he's got longer arms than Makabu, but he certainly fights as though he's got longer arms than Makabu, put it that way. And he certainly had longer arms than Bellew, despite the fact he's several inches shorter than Bellew. So he was able to control Bellew from the outside. Even though Bellew tried to box long against Stevenson, it didn't work because Stevenson had the longer arms, despite being shorter. And he was pot-shotting with that left hand. We know how Stevenson fights. And obviously Bellew is at a higher weight now, cruiserweight, and seems to be stronger and hitting harder now. So I really don't think the Stevenson fight has any real bearing on how Tony Bellew will do against Makabu. And with the extra weight, remember, he was dehydrating down. As a amateur, Tony Bellew was the size he is now, 200 pounds. So draining down 25 pounds, that's a massive amount of weight. That could very well have diminished not only his power, but also his punch resistance, draining down that ridiculous amount of weight when he was 200 pounds for a good portion of his amateur career. And as I say, stylistically, Makabu is nothing like Adonis Stevenson. And does he even hit harder than Stevenson? We don't know. Maybe he does, maybe he don't. But as I say, there's far more to it than just punching power. From a stylistic point of view, Makabu is a totally different proposition than Adonis Stevenson. I actually think that Tony Bellew will do far better at long range against Makabu than he did against Stevenson. I think he'll have far more success boxing Makabu than he had boxing Stevenson. Now, the second comment that was left on my last video was an individual who took exception to me saying that Ilunga Makabu is a fairly rudimentary fighter. Well, no offense to that guy, but you sound like you just started watching boxing yesterday. Because Ilunga Makabu is a fairly rudimentary fighter. This person was saying, "Oh, how can you say Makabu is rudimentary? He's got amazing upper body movement and head movement that nobody else in the division has." Again, you must have just started watching boxing yesterday. Did you watch the Makabu Machunu fight? Did you see that fight? Well, if you did see that fight, and for those of you who didn't see that fight, let me explain in a nutshell exactly how Makabu fought in that fight. He fought like a southpaw version of Antonio Margarito. That's how he fought against Mchunu. That's the best guy that he's beaten or fought on his record. He fought like a southpaw version of Antonio Margarito, just walking forward, no head movement at all, getting absolutely battered in the first few rounds against Mchunu for the first 4-5 rounds. His head was, all over the place like a bobblehead doll. His head was on a swivel, getting bounced all over the place. No defense, no head movement, no lateral movement with his feet, no feints, nothing. And you're trying to tell me that he's not a rudimentary fighter? He is rudimentary. Now, don't get it twisted. I obviously know that Mchunu is extremely talented, extremely gifted athletically, very fast, slick, and all that. Be that as it may, I've seen several Makabu fights, and there is nothing sophisticated about his approach. Now, he may have been more crude, or he may have been made to look more crude in the Mchunu fight than normal because of Mchunu's abilities. But nevertheless, Makabu is not a slick start by any means. He's not an Adonis Stevenson. He's obviously not a Mchunu. He comes forward. He's a relatively slow starter. And he applies steady, stalking, patient pressure. When he gets into range, he likes to let the hooks go to the body, the uppercuts, and all that type of stuff. He does have the occasional bit of head movement, but it's sporadic. You're not going to see it that often. Generally speaking, he's walking forward in pretty much straight lines and letting go with shots. Right? Patient aggression. Now, in terms of his character, I think that's going to be something that the referee is going to have to watch in this Tony Bellew fight, because both of them, Bellew and Makabu, are fiery characters. It might not have manifested itself yet in the build-up in terms of Makabu showing the fiery side to him, but he does have it. He certainly showed it in the Mchunu fight. He was very animated, let's just say. He seemed to get frustrated very easily by Mchunu. And he was complaining to the referee. He was posturing, he was gesturing, he was getting very agitated and letting it be known to the referee and to the crowd that he was agitated. So he's quite an abrasive type of character, Makabu. And as we know, Bellew is also an abrasive type of character. He's not, Bellew's not the kind of guy to complain to the referee as much as Makabu, but he is an abrasive type of character. So I think the referee's going to have to be very strong in this fight on Sunday to try and keep the fight under control. It could go off. It could go down the wrong route. It could end up being fouls and all types of stuff. It could get ugly, basically. So the ref's going to have to keep a close eye on both of these guys and be strong. Based on their styles and based on how I think they're going to fight, I suspect this fight won't really catch fire until the second half. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the atmosphere and everything will suck Tony Bellew into a shootout sooner than it should, or sooner than he should. But just based on the tactics and the styles and what I've seen of both of these guys before, Makabu tends to be a fairly slow starter, as I say. And Bellew, I think, is going to try and box cautious and use his height and reach advantages. If he has a reach advantage, I still think he's going to try and box that way. So, yeah, I think it will take a while. And I said this in a previous video, for Makabu to eventually get close enough where he can start unloading on Tony Bellew. When he does, will Bellew survive? Will Bellew have enough power to keep Makabu off of him? Even though Makabu was very frustrated in the Mchunu fight and was showing out and complaining to the referee and all this type of stuff, he did take a hell of a beating. Mchunu is not a massive puncher, but he's certainly very sharp. And when he's hitting you clean the way he was hitting Makabu, as consistently as he was, he's going to hurt you. And he did hurt Makabu in that fight in the early rounds. But Makabu sucked it up, took that punishment to the body and head, and came back, and he rallied incredibly well in the late rounds of that fight. Very, very well. And Machunu just faded away with a whimper, pretty much. When that left uppercut landed, he was done. I expect Tony Bellew to be far more resilient than that, but we have seen him taken out. We saw that in the Adonis Stevenson fight. Again, I think Bellew's going to be stronger this time out because he's a cruiserweight. But, you know, Bellew is a resilient guy, but even he, if he gets hit with something hard enough, he might capitulate as well. He might just go down and not have the strength or the willpower to get up. We'll see. It's definitely an interesting fight. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And yeah, that's how I see it going, man. I think it's probably not gonna catch fire until the second half of the fight, when Tony Bellew maybe starts to tire a little bit and Makabu finds his range and gets his rhythm going. Then we might see some fireworks. Maybe Tony Bellew's got enough to get through it. Because as I say, at the risk of offending that guy who I obviously offended first time around, Makabu really is a pretty rudimentary fighter. There's nothing that special about him. His hand speed is decent, but it's nothing exceptional. I don't think it's anything that Tony Bellew wouldn't have seen before. So, I don't know. It's all poised for a very good fight, and I'll be very interested to see what happens. So, like I say, this is part 1, and I'm going to do part 2 after the weigh-in on Saturday. Let me know what you feel about everything I talked about in this video, people. It's your boy.